Lewis Hamilton's record-equalling 7th World Championship success inevitably set off his harshest critics. The arguments that seek to water down his achievements are well worn, but are worth looking at in more detail, both to debunk them and to evaluate whether there really is anything in them. This isn't necessarily about arguing Hamilton is better than the greats of the past, but simply to counter those who suggest he doesn't stand shoulder to shoulder with the very best drivers who have practiced their art in Grand Prix racing. If you haven't already done so, do subscribe to this channel for more from the race, and so you know every time there's something new to watch, hit the notifications bell. We're going to tackle the most common complaints about Hamilton one by one to explain why these criticisms don't hold water. After all, so many of them could be unfairly levelled at the greats of the past as well. Hamilton always has the best car. There's no disputing the fact Mercedes has often had a car advantage for the past 2 seasons and for much of the V6 turbo hybrid era. But across Hamilton's 7 titles, you can make a case that for 3 of them there were other teams capable of winning the championship: Ferrari in 2008, 2017 and 2018. This is often forgotten, as is the fact that Hamilton himself has also played a central role in making Mercedes the preeminent team of the past decade. It's also a somewhat disingenuous argument, as the unstated premise here is that Grand Prix history is full of drivers winning a title in cars that were not at least equal best. While it has happened, very often the title is won by the driver in the best car. All 3 of Ayrton Senna's crowns were in the best car, as although the 1991 McLaren wasn't as quick as the Williams for parts of the season, it was the strongest all-round package. The same can be said for Jim Clark, for perhaps 4 of Juan Manuel Fangio's titles and the majority of Michael Schumacher's, yet that does not and should not undermine the legitimacy of their undeniable claims to greatness. Grand Prix racing is about a fusion of human and machine. The laws of physics define what the car is capable of, and it's down to the driver to extract as close to 100% of that potential as possible. And Hamilton has been extremely good at doing that. Granted, for the spectacle we'd all enjoy seeing him up against stronger opposition. But you can make that case for those who've gone before as well. It's simply not how things usually work in F1. The greatest deserve their places with the top teams and are central to making those cars as successful as they are. Hamilton doesn't have to race hard. Given Hamilton has 97 pole positions, it's no surprise he has racked up plenty of lights to flag victories in his career. But he has also shown that he is one of the best in wheel-to-wheel action when he's had the chance. During his career, he's won from as low as 14th on the grid and has 11 victories starting not on the front row. It was his wheel-to-wheel prowess alongside his sheer speed that first caught the eye when he came into Formula 1, so he has plenty of credit in the bank when it comes to this. It's simply that very often Hamilton does such a good job that he is at the front already and can stay there. This is an underrated skill that looks so straightforward from the outside, but requires relentless focus, great performances, ace tyre management, and the capacity to adapt as conditions change. When he wins without having to race other cars in literal terms, he's effectively done his racing in other ways. And he's no exception when it comes to that, as plenty of the greatest have done the same thing. Clark took 8 so-called Grand Slams, pole position, fastest lap and all laps led, in his F1 career, with Hamilton racking up 6. Michael Schumacher has 5, Jackie Stewart and Ayrton Senna 4, and there's nothing wrong with that. The simplest way to win a race is to control it from the front, but it's being in that position in the first place and then not letting that advantage slip away race after race that characterises the greats. Hamilton has a compliant teammate. Hamilton has certainly had a decisive advantage over Valtteri Bottas during their 4 seasons together at Mercedes, but Bottas is a seriously good driver who has pushed Hamilton hard in qualifying, even though he often comes up short on Sundays thanks to not matching Hamilton's adaptability. But this disparity casts light on Hamilton's excellence rather than suggesting Bottas is a poor driver. The greats always make the merely very good look average. But Hamilton has hardly had a queue of compliant teammates throughout his career. He has partnered 3 drivers who won world championships: Fernando Alonso, Jenson Button and Nico Rosberg, and won 2 of his titles up against the latter. In 14 F1 seasons, he's partnered past or future world champions in 8 of them, had 4 alongside Bottas, and the other 2 spent alongside Heikki Kovalainen. That's one of the most formidable array of teammates any driver has faced. While he is the de facto team leader at Mercedes, that's thanks to his performance rather than a preordained status. The days where there were very formal hierarchies in teams have passed, so there's no equipment or tyre advantage, and he certainly hasn't taken over his title rival teammate's car during a race, as Fangio once did. That's not to denigrate Fangio, for he stands alongside Hamilton as one of the greatest of all time, but it does expose the holes in the argument. In F1, performance is everything, and teams become the domain of the better drivers, even if it upsets the existing order. Just look at Charles Leclerc making Ferrari his own since joining as Sebastian Vettel's junior teammate. That's not to say we wouldn't be fascinated to see Hamilton up against Max Verstappen or Leclerc in the same team, but he's in the position he is in because of his brilliance. Hamilton, and all today's drivers, have it easy. It's true that drivers thankfully no longer have to stake their lives against odds that mean some won't make it through their careers, even if there is still some risk in these days of vastly improved safety. But the skill level required to get the most out of a Grand Prix car remains universal, regardless of era. Although today's safety measures create a buffer, today's cars are hugely complex and require a more cerebral approach than ever before. While teams are enormous, with every detail optimised and point of data absorbed, the driver remains at the heart of everything. The idea that modern F1 cars can drive themselves is a reductive one and demonstrably untrue, given performance differences exist between drivers. It might be a colder, less romantic form of Grand Prix driving, but that doesn't mean it's straightforward. You have to be a different kind of driver in 2020 to the one even that Hamilton had to be 12 years ago to win his first title. So it is as you work your way back through time. The exact equation that you must solve to prevail changes, but the difficulty of finding that solution doesn't. F1 is different now, the personal stakes have changed, but easier? No. Hamilton talks too much. This is the strangest of the criticisms. Regardless of whether you agree with Hamilton's causes, surely respecting him for using his platform to advance such principles is the logical reaction. The clamour to discredit him as a driver because of what he does off track is illogical. After all, some of the great sports people in history are venerated for making their voices heard. Chances are, in future, that aspect of Hamilton will be appreciated even more, and he's recently talked of his desire to have an impact in the countries where F1 races that have a bad human rights record. That cannot be a bad thing. But the idea this somehow compromises what he does on track is absurd, regardless of where you sit politically. The fact is, Hamilton is a hugely important Grand Prix driver off track as well as on it, and he has that in common with the greats, even if the way this sort of trait manifests itself varies depending on the driver and the era. This debate will go on, so do let us know what you think in the comments below. And if you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to give us a thumbs up.